Hey, Bry Guy here, and I'm going to be looking through a bunch of different engines on the Steam Deck. So I'm going to look through a set of different engines and the different games and how they run on this device specifically, and then see if there's any commonalities between how different engines perform. So anyways, I hope you enjoy this video. Hey, so I've been playing the Steam Deck a few days now, and I've been testing out different engines and how they run on the Steam Deck. And you can see here, so I'm not running, I have FSR off, and I have the game running fully unlocked frame rate, so up to 60 frames per second. You can see that that's off. And the game settings, I have it set, sorry, it's hard to see with the diagnostics on. So this is with the game set to roughly medium or high across the board with a few settings set to medium, like volumetric lighting. And even with just a few settings turned down, in this game, I'm getting a pretty solid 60 frames per second. It does dip a little bit in combat, so let's just run out here for a second. Which buttons run on this game? Okay, out here. So you can see a dip there, 57, 55, 56. Nothing egregious. But it feels very smooth to play it. Anyways, so this is the first RE engine game that I was going to test because I find this engine really impressive. So I figured if any engine would run particularly well on the Steam Deck, it's this one. So anyways, you can see here, relatively stable, 60 frames per second. I wish the screen was a little bit more saturated. Especially compared to the Switch OLED, which I play regularly, it's a fairly desaturated screen. But in regards to this game, if I was playing just this game, I would think that the Steam Deck is the most amazing handheld I'd ever played in my entire life. Basically, pretty close to what feels like a rock solid 60 frames per second. In the first area, you get some dips with the alpha transparencies, just because it's likely having issues with the alpha blending that happens when you have those kind of particles on the screen. So the worst dip we saw there is 54, but if you're looking at the screen itself, it still looks really smooth. You don't really notice those dips all that much. They're not too bad. So yeah, anyways, this is Resident Evil 2. So I'm expecting most of the RE Engine games to perform the same. So let's grab another one right here. It might take a while to load, so I'll kind of talk about what my expectations are. Now, Resident Evil Village, I gotta close RE5, RE2 first. Okay, so RE Village right here, I'm expecting it to run similarly. Obviously, it's a little bit more demanding game. They pushed some of the graphic settings further than they previously did, but we should get relatively similar performance. Because what I'm going to kind of discuss, my expectations for the Steam Deck is that some engines are going to perform significantly better than others. So I'm going to test a couple of engines today. I'm going to test the RE engine with games like RE2, RE Village, RE3, DMC. I'll test some other games, and you're going to see from an engine-to-engine basis which ones are the most impressive on this in terms of utilizing the hardware. So anyways, straight away, we're getting some dips, but not too bad. 60 frames per second in this screen. I can go to the settings in a second to see what those are. Just let this load. Loading times on this are, I mean, they're worse than you get on a PC with an NVMe drive or on the PS5, but they're really not particularly bad in comparison to this. So in this enclosed area, let's look at my settings for a second. We have, where is it? Okay, so I think I have it set to roughly medium, normal, oh, high texture quality. Yeah, and a bunch of settings are medium. I put the volumetric lighting to low, shadow quality medium, and the rest of the settings are on. Obviously no ray tracing in the current implementation. But, oh wait, did I have ray tracing on? I don't think I can put it on in the Steam Deck version right now. But, sorry, I'll take a look real quick. Yeah, ray tracing is currently blacked out just by the API. Okay, so we can go outside. When we get into the big open areas here, you're going to see some dips, but it's also ridiculously impressive on the screen. So just the amount of detail and density, on the camera you might be able to see some of the aliasing and stuff, but when you're playing, I swear it looks amazing. It's super crisp at native, and it feels kind of. I feel like this game here feels like you're playing like the PS5 version in your hand more so than it feels like playing a PS4 or PS3 game. And I think this is one of the most impressive games I've played personally on the Steam Deck so far. But RE Engine running very well in this game. If we get some enemies on the screen, we might see frame rate drops, but I found it was relatively consistent. It's hard to play and watch. That's where we came from. So we go here. We go through here. There we go. So there's enemies after me. Okay. So now I've triggered for the enemies to come after me. I think I got to go around this way. No? Yes? Oh, here we go. So now we have lots of enemies coming after us. Dipping frames a little bit. 54, 53. Nothing terrible, but not perfectly smooth. If you're looking at it on the Steam Deck itself, it's very smooth, but on the video feed, it's going to look choppy because my camera is limited to 30 frames per second. But you can see the frame output in the corner there. So anyways, in these engines, still roughly 60 frames per second. When we get to the big open areas, those are the worst performers of this. But overall, like, very impressive. So anyways, there's two RE Engine games, both performing very similarly on somewhere mixture of high and medium settings. The only setting that's low is volumetric lighting because you wouldn't notice it at this resolution anyways. But pretty close to 60 frames per second. Not too far off of that at all. Okay. So the other RE Engine game that we can try would be Devil May Cry, which is one that they put in their list. So I'm not surprised if it performs. I'm guessing all of these RE Engine games are going to perform beautifully. You're not going to get. They're roughly going to run between 50 and 60 frames per second on some mix between medium and high settings. And that's incredibly impressive on a handheld like this. So let's just boot this up. Sorry, the camera's out of focus. I wish I had a better means to capture this, but this is the best means I currently have, so I apologize for that. Okay, but this is primarily analytical as far as I'm concerned. Goodness. Okay. So after preloading the shaders, it's going to stutter at the very beginning of loading a game most of the time because it has to pre-cache all the shaders that are being used in the game. But once all of those are gone, we should get a pretty regularly smoother frame rate. So you can see we're hovering somewhere between 50 and 60 frames per second all the time now that that's happened. It's going to have some dips, but again, another pretty robust RE Engine game. I'm getting crashing in that spot. So let's move on to the games from other engines. So we have let's see. So those are RE Engine games. Let's move over to, okay. So even odd examples, like if we were going to boot from, let's look at the FromSoft Engine games. So when you have, there's a consistency across all of these games, whether you're booting Elden Ring, whether you're booting Dark Souls, or whether you're booting Sekiro. So I think out of the three, Sekiro's port is the best, but I think you're going to come across very similar performance in all three just due to limitations in the actual engine. So I doubt we're going to hit 60 frames per second in any of them. My guess is we're going to have very similar performance. I know that out of all of the games that have had videos on the Steam Deck, Elden Ring is probably the most common. So anyways, let's just load it for a few seconds. We got the frame rate unlocked, so we'll get a pretty good sensation right away of how it's going to run basically. So as soon as the game starts loading for real, we've dropped from, okay, we dropped from the 60 frames per second. Now we're getting somewhere between 30 and 40 frames per second regularly. Mind you, it looks and feels great when you're actually playing on the Steam Deck, but you can see the frame rate. So currently I got FSR off. Let's check out my settings. My settings for this are medium. So I have graphics settings on medium, and I'm getting somewhere between 30 and 40 frames per second across the board. We can, if we want to, we can engage a boss and see how that pans out. It's a boss right over here. So let's just take a run over here and see what happens when we put the game under load. There we go. Just got to run to the tree. Overall, it's like this is the shortest period of time I've ever had between playing a game and having a handheld iteration of it ready. Usually you have somewhere between 5 or 6 years after a game comes out before you can play the handheld version. Like think about Alien Isolation on Switch, or even like ports of games from the Super Nintendo to the Game Boy Advance. So we did have some dips below 30. There's a couple to 29, which would stop us from being able to lock it at a flawless 30 FPS if we wanted to go to half refresh. We could always put the settings to low, but it would really not get too much higher of a frame rate. Maybe we could test that. If we run out of the range of them for a second. Let's see. So, dangerous. Okay. Okay. So if we drop to low, we lose a good amount of grass foliage, but we're still getting dips to a very similar 31 is the lowest I've seen before. 33 there on the hit. So we gained maybe 29 there. So the thing is that it doesn't seem to take out the complete lows in the frame rate. We're still getting lows of 29. Maybe they'd go as low as 27 or something like that. But that's kind of the worst case scenario for Elden Ring. Let's see another Souls game. So if we grab Dark Souls 3, we're assessing FromSoft's engine here. So From Software obviously makes all of these games, Sekiro, Dark Souls, and Elden Ring. And by loading these games, we can get a sense of how individual engines perform. But we can see right away that the engine performance of FromSoft's engine is nowhere near as good as RE engine in the utilizing the Steam Deck properly. That we're not going to see the exact same 60 frames per second lock that we see when we play it on 60 frames per second lock from any game in FromSoft's engine that we will see in RE engine on quite a few games. And I would argue that some of the games in RE engine that run at 60 frames per second look better than any of these games. Yeah, they're doing different things. Elden Ring's more open world, but Dark Souls 3 isn't open world. So this is a better sense in terms of whether or not the Steam Deck is the issue here, or whether it's specifically an engine-based performance thing. So let's boot up Dark Souls. Just trying to get to the server right now. Currently, it's at a locked 60 frames per second, but you can't see that because the Dark Souls text is right on that. Okay. Let it go again. Come on. Log into the server. Should have just forced it into offline mode. Okay. Cancel. Okay. Offline. Continue. Okay. We're just looking at performance anyways. So right away, you can see here, we're a bit higher. We got somewhere between 50 and 57, but I think I lowered the settings to get there already. So let's take a look at what our settings are. So this is at quality settings custom. I set everything to medium. A couple things are set to high. Let's just go to a blanket medium settings and see what our performance looks like. Okay, so we're getting somewhere between 50 and 60 frames per second. Come on. The one thing I find that's kind of frustrating is the height difference between the L1 and the L2 buttons on the side make it very difficult to play games like holding both buttons simultaneously. So it's like your fingers have a big gap moving up and down between the two. Yeah, I can barely see what I'm doing. My mic's in the way. So I apologize if I play terribly right now. Okay, so some spots we approach 60. Let's go find this boss and see what happens to the frame rate. This. Okay, so here's the first boss. Down to 53, 46, back up to the 50s. Let's see what happens when this character starts doing things. I gotta remove the sword. So right away, drops to 45. The lock-on going on. Let's back up to 50 for now. 48. It's quite a bit of frame variance between, 40s to 50s. It's running a bit better than I expected. It looks great, actually. Well, won that one. Well, it dips to 43 when lots of particles explode onto the screen. But overall, really solid experience. It's just, I don't know. I would either lower the settings more to try to get to a lock 60. We can try that. Seeing if setting the graphics to low from medium gets us to a full 60, or if that is just out of reach because of either a memory bandwidth issue or an engine optimization issue. There's lots of reasons why you wouldn't be able to get a flawless 60 frames per second in a game. But okay, so anyways, we're in here, 55, 52. So it's much more inconsistent than we get with the RE games, but it's still a pretty strong performance overall. So changing the settings to low did seem to net us about 5 frames per second. It didn't get us to a perfect 60. I don't think FSR would take us there either. If we put on FSR, I'm curious where that gets us. Yeah, it's just a couple frames better. I don't think it's worth, in this case, the resolution sacrifice. So let's go and turn FSR off. There we go. But yeah, so anyways, this is Dark Souls 3. Let's exit the game and switch over to Sekiro. Sorry, I'm looking over a mic, so it's difficult for me to see. I have beaten all these games, but I played through all of them on the PS4 or 5, depending on which game it was, PS4 Pro or the PS5. So right away, we're sitting, well, right now, I mean, it's just a black screen, but we're 60 frames per second right now. Okay. Great. There we go. Continue. So now it's loading. So I'm guessing the performance is going to be slightly worse than Dark Souls 3. It's a similar engine, but it's obviously it was designed with different things in mind. Whereas the X is the hug the wall. So we're hovering around 50 to 60 frames per second right now. We're not, I mean, overall, it seems to be running 20% worse across the board than we were getting with the RE engine. Let's take a look at our options. What are our graphics settings? So our graphics is currently set to custom, which probably means it's a mixture of high and medium. So it's running pretty good for a lot of high settings. 48, 47. I mean, I think if we put it to medium, we can get up into the 50 range most of the time. But it's still going to have drops to 40. It might even go as low as the 30s at some point in time. So this is the rough kind of estimate of where we're going to get with From Software's engine on the Steam Deck. So pretty solid performance overall. It's definitely playable. All of these games are playable. You never get, it doesn't seem to, there's any level of compromise with this engine specifically that gets us to 60. Where with RE engine, there was quite a few things that we could do that would get us all the way to 60. So anyways, just things to keep in mind with this specific engine. Runs and looks great, to be honest. If you're playing it on the screen itself, it looks absolutely phenomenal. So yeah, this is Sekiro, somewhere between 50 and so as low as 45, but for the most part 50 to 60 frames per second. Pretty solid. Looks great. It's a little, it fluctuates a little bit too much for me. Sudden dips to 45 frames per second are pretty hard for me personally. I like it to fluctuate a lot less. I mean, it would be great if this had a variable refresh screen, but it just doesn't. So there's nothing we can do. So when we're sneaking past lots of enemies and more particle effects with fire and snow and stuff, the frame rate does start dropping. Hop down here. Let's get out this way. Anyways. Run. Just trying to get enough people following me that, oh man, you really don't have any health earlier on. Anyways, 41 is the worst I saw there, but that's how that game is roughly performing. So let's close Sekiro and let's test out some other games. So let's check out Nier Automata, which is using PLATIINUM's custom engine. So I'm pretty sure they built this engine from scratch for this game. They talked about modifying what they had already done in, I think, Bayonetta 2 and was it Bayonetta 2? But anyways, it's their in-house engine. They've used it for several games, and this is kind of where they're attempting to go with it. With Nier Automata, you can get a sense of how it runs. So I was probably most surprised by this game because I think I have it set at a medium settings. Right here, yes. Okay, so let that boot up. So right away, we're running at a pretty constant 60 FPS. So let's check our system settings and our graphics. Where's our graphics settings? Screen. So our graphics setting is set to it's currently set to high, I believe. Okay, custom, high settings. So even with that, it's running really consistently at 60 frames per second, which is amazing. Like seeing it on this handheld is absolutely incredible. Um, I didn't expect to get such a solid portable version of this game anytime soon, really. So it's remarkable actually to see this running. And this is where the Steam Deck does the absolute best when you put in a game and it just surprises you that you have a flawless, high-end PC version of this game now as a handheld. And pretty consistent 60 frames per second, even in battle here. I'm sure it'll dip a bit. You can see the CPU utilization is around 50 to 60%. Even when we have all of these alpha effects on screen. Sorry, I'm dying because I'm looking at a monitor, but runs beautifully. Like, very interesting use of the engine. However, when you play Nier Replicant, which isn't running on Platinum's custom engine, this is running on, I don't know what engine Nier Replicant's running on, but anyways, different engine, not the same tech at all. And when we run this game, so let's see, get this booting up. Okay. So yeah, it's running 60 in the menus. This one I thought was really strange when I was playing it because I played around with the settings. I tried low, I tried medium, I tried high, and I couldn't get it anywhere near a consistent 60 frames per second. Like it was miles off. It looks worse than Nier Automata and it runs considerably worse on here. But the strangest thing about it is the utilization isn't particularly high. So here I'm running between 40 and 39 there. So roughly in the 40s in the frame rate. But the utilization is super low. If you look, it's like locked at 20%, 10%, and it's not even at its full clock rate for the GPU, and the CPU is around half. So I don't know what's bottlenecking this, but it doesn't run as well as I would like. And it's sad to see after Nier Automata runs so perfectly on this that we have games that perform like this. It's fluctuating somewhere between 30 and 60. The worst thing about this game specifically is that the movement is tied to your frame rate. So if you lower the frame rate, the game speed drops. So if we set the 15 frames per second limit, you can see it goes in slow motion. But the same is true if you set it to 30 frames per second as well. So all of the logic is tied to the frame rate. So the game slows down a bit by setting it to 30 FPS. If you set it to 60 FPS, now we're getting a higher frame rate and the game speed is up, but then you have to deal with judder. So it's a shame that this, obviously it would be nice to have this game running at as well as Automata, especially considering I would say that it looks worse than Automata and it's a remake of an older game. But anyways, so that one was somewhat disappointing for me. Let's move over to the next one. So let's look at the probably one of my favorite Unreal Engine games right here. I think it's probably some of the best visual use of the technology. Okay. So booting some Hellblade. There we go. The Unreal logo. There's all of that banding you're seeing up from the light isn't visible when I look at the screen. That's just happening on the camera. So okay. Cool enough. It looks like the ray tracing features are available, but we can see with this game specifically, what are my settings at? We have the game's graphics currently on high, and the only thing that's set to medium is ray tracing. But at high settings, we have pretty solid 40 to 50. I haven't seen almost any frames in the 50. It's more consistent than we were getting with the From Software engine games. So at least it's not transitioning to very high frame rates for a set number of frames and then very low. But it seems to be kind of somewhere between the 40s and the 50s. If you go up in the sky, maybe you'll get the 50s. There's a huge dip to 20 frames per second. But overall, this one's actually surprisingly okay. It's not perfect. I can try. I don't think I can get this up to 60. We can try. So if we change the settings, let's turn the ray tracing off first off. And fall back to that. And let's set this graphic settings to medium and see if we can get the game to give us 60 frames per second. So by going to medium, we gain a little bit. Now we're in the 50s range instead of the 40s range a lot of the time. It's it looks amazing on the screen to see it running actually. And this is one, I'll do a comparison with this at some point in time with the Switch version, because this is like essentially a no compromise version of Hellblade compared to the Switch, which had to nip and tuck and hide a lot to get to where it wanted to. So overall, it's pretty solid experience. It ran a bit better than I was expecting an Unreal title to run, and I'm overall impressed with how this looks and how this runs on the system. I wonder if they did some low-level optimizations for RDNA 2. They might have, because they played around with it with the recent patch to the Xbox Series X and the Xbox Series X and S. So it's possible that some of those optimizations made it over to the PC side as well. But overall, this is a very, very impressive Unreal game on here. So yeah, it didn't have the caveats that I was expecting in that specific game. I don't have too many Unreal games on here. I'd have to download more. But the last one I can check out Yakuza 2 because that's a custom engine, or let's boot up Death Stranding because that is Decima. Overall, this is one of the most impressive handhelds I think I've played around with. Um, I don't think a console manufacturer, I don't think that Sony or Nintendo would ever have signed off on this. It's just a bit too big, a bit too heavy, and a bit too loud. And I think that they would have probably opted to shave 10-15% off of the clock speed on both the CPU and the GPU and had it perfectly locked. And they could probably make up for that 10-15% in performance by having the games perfectly optimized for their hardware. But that's the route I would guess that they would take with this. They wouldn't have released something quite as loud as this. So in some ways, it's kind of pushing its way to where its current performance level is in a way that no other console manufacturer would. And I could tell you, by just sitting in bed with this playing, the fan, it's the pitch of it is actually quite bothersome, and that's probably my biggest trade back. It's like I would have preferred they either lock the clocks a little bit lower on both and just had them consistent to maybe offset that, but then they wouldn't be able to push it kind of the way that they have. The other thing that they could have done is they could have just waited for one die shrink or two, because it's kind of one of these weird things where it's like almost perfect in a way. So in Death Stranding, I'm getting, well, let's see if I can clear up this camera for everyone a little bit. So it's in the 50s at my current settings. My current settings are system. Oh man, I can't see that. Options, graphics settings. So it's currently set to, I don't think that they had the option for the native resolution of the device. So you had to crop on the top and the bottom. This is the graphics at very high. So let's set it to medium with Decima and see what happens. I think I got to go to the bottom to confirm. Yeah. So at medium settings, currently we're at much closer to the 60 frames per second. Ooh, don't fall down the hill. This is incredibly impressive. So this game is absolutely gorgeous. So I would argue this looks considerably better than any of the From Software games, or even Hellblade, but it's running remarkably well. And this is the way that honestly, I think RDNA 2 is one of the best scaling GPU architectures I've seen. To go from a 512 shader design like this and run games, yeah, it's running it at 720p, but on the screen it looks absolutely gorgeous. To be honest, it's unbelievable to have a almost flawless handheld version of this game in this period of time. So really impressed with the engine output here. It's amazing that you can play something that looks like this portable. It like passing this to people and showing them the reactions is pretty insane. Um, And if I was willing to compromise a couple more settings, I'm not sure if this engine will let me get to 60 in the same way that Resident Evil engine will, or Nier Automata's Platinum's engine does. You can see it's going to drop frames a little bit more. Whereas I feel like with those engines, I can compromise a couple settings and get it to the lock 60. I don't know if FSR will get me there with this game specifically. So if I set FSR on, I'm curious whether that will get me a lock 60. I don't know if a bug took out my FSR because it seems that it doesn't make a difference when I turn it on. When I turn it on and off, I basically get the exact same performance. So I'm curious if something is currently just messed up with my system software. But anyways, 50 to 60 frames per second in Death Stranding. If I set it to low, I might get the rest of the way there, or there might just be too much CPU overhead or bandwidth requirements for me to actually ever get to a full 60. So let's set it to low. I don't know if I would want to compromise that much, but anyways, set it to low. And does that get us all the way to 60? Still fluctuating. It's closer to 60 most of the time, but 55, 57, 46. So the thing is that we're not netting that much different performance by dropping the graphic settings. It's like the difference in scaling between going from low, medium, and high. So even if we go from that, yeah, we're getting 50 to 60 frames per second. But if we go all the way up to, where is it? Sorry, game settings, graphics quality. If we go all the way up to, well, default, which is one above high, apparently. One is above medium, apparently. Even just going to default, it's like you lose maybe 5 or 6 frames per second. So there's something bottlenecking this game because it's not like any setting you do is going to get you all the way to 60. So it's almost more worth it to just go a little bit higher with the graphics settings and enjoy whatever slight frame rate loss you might get. But I mean, the worst I'm getting is like 46, 47, and this looks absolutely incredible. Like, I can't say it enough. This is seeing this on a handheld, like the jump from the Switch to Death Stranding on a handheld or Nier Automata is unbelievable. Just the amount of texture detail and geometry and the photogrammetry. This game uses like full out photogrammetry for all of their environments. If you look at the density and the rocks there on the other side and the detail of the moss, it's like absolutely insane. So yeah, I can't believe that I'm currently playing a handheld version of this game and this close to its release. Okay, so I think that's a lot of them. I'll walk a couple more. So the Street Fighter games I tested and they all ran really well. Yakuza Kiwami 2 uses their Dragon engine. I really enjoy this series, so this is one that I wanted to include just because I think it's really interesting what this specific game can do. And they're just fun. Like they're fun stories, fun everything. Like I've enjoyed playing all of the Yakuza games that I finished and Judgment as well. Um, so I noticed this one, there's a pretty considerable difference between the cutscenes and the gameplay for frame rates. So when you're playing any of the um, gameplay, so if we just go to continue where we were, we can get pretty close. I just want to see what settings we have it at right now. Settings, graphic settings. So it's currently set to custom. I don't know what specifically is custom about it. So it's medium, and I think motion blur is off, and that's what makes it custom. So anyways, with that, we're looking in gameplay at about 60 frames per second. Pretty consistent, actually, which is really impressive on a handheld. This would be a really fun game to play on the go. So, but once we go into the cutscenes, you can see immediately the camera pan, we lost a little bit. And if we remember the events, then we'll see whether or not, I mean, this might be a cutscene. If this is just a video, then. I think this is a video. So let's skip that. Let's see if another cutscene comes up. Uh, yeah, these are all video files. So not useful for determining frame rate. Just not keep remembering, and let's just see what the next story thing, because the next in-game scene we should see whether or not the frame rate dips. So as it's panning, I think that the character models when they come on the screen are what's going to be most likely to dip the frame rate. Not too bad though, 57, 56. So I would guess that with a couple more compromises in settings, there's a chance we might get all of this game to lock closer to 60. So the worst case scenario we're seeing here is currently like 55, and that's with, how many is that? 6 high detail characters on screen at once. So overall, very impressive take on specifically seeing Yakuza running on this in the Dragon engine is really impressive. I wouldn't say that it's as impressive a game and engine as like Death Stranding or um, specifically the RE engine, but still puts up a pretty good show. Mostly over 50 frames per second at medium settings. So really solid. Great way to play it portable. I'm glad that this works. And let's go to, I guess, the final game that I'm going to show right now. Well, I'll run two. So the Crash Insane Trilogy. This is I guess I've never had a system and owned already so many games at launch, which is the kind of absurd thing about the Steam Deck, is that immediately upon purchasing it, I have a ludicrous amount of games available to me. I have over 1,000 games on Steam, and they're all available to play right away. They don't let you skip this. They don't let you skip it on PlayStation either. No, wait. Yeah, they do? Why? There we go. Okay, so we're running at 60 frames per second here, which is interesting because I'm pretty sure that the PS4 itself locked it to 30 frames per second. Let's go to Crash 2 because it's my favorite out of the three and see what kind of performance we're looking at. Okay. So it's running at a pretty solid lock 60. Let's do Crash Dash because you're running away from things. And that will be, I don't know, I guess a little bit more likely to tank the frame rate. There we go. So currently it's at a lock 60 frames per second. This is gorgeous and it's running very well. A lot of games default to 720p, so there's quite a few games that won't use the entire screen real estate. And in that way, I guess they have a little bit of relief just in terms of the amount of pixels that they're required to render. But this is a rock solid 60 frames per second. Absolutely beautiful, looks amazing, and is running flawlessly. Great. So let's see what the settings were. Graphics were running at medium across the board. So at medium settings, looks and absolutely runs great. Wonder if we push it to the highest settings. Or ultra, I guess. Let's see. So now, just setting it to ultra, we get out of the 60 frames per second territory and we start getting more frame drops. So I don't know if it's worth it for this game. I can't on this screen resolution really tell the difference between those settings. I'm sure on a larger screen it might be more obvious, but it might not be worth the frame dips. To just drop to medium, you get a pretty much rock solid 60 frames per second. So that's what I'd recommend for that game. But very, very good impressions with that engine. So far out of the games, the worst ones that we've seen were, I would say, Performance-wise, Hellblade was okay, but the worst performance we've seen was all the RE Engine games. It was Nier Replicant, and there was weird utilization there because it didn't seem like it was properly utilizing the hardware. Either there's some bottleneck that's stopping it from using the hardware, like it really saps memory bandwidth or something like that, or it's merely it could be an issue with Proton and the translation layer. I have to say I'm overall very happy with the SteamOS experience on this. I was expecting to want to change to Windows just for compatibility with more games, but I haven't wanted to at all. I've been really surprised with how quickly games have been improving on Proton. So very, very impressed with this handheld device. This architecture. I'm curious what RDNA 3 will bring, but RDNA 2 already is a remarkably powerful architecture for a handheld device, and Ryzen as well. The mixture of Ryzen and RDNA is just remarkable in this, where I don't know how they could have made it much better other than getting one die shrink, getting the noise down, and maybe dropping a little bit of those clocks. So I think this was another one that I was more disappointed with. I don't know what engine this runs on, but I was surprised with how low the frame rate was in this game. So we'll see when this one boots in a second. So 20, 30 FPS. Seems to be locking to 30 FPS. Let's see if it has VSync on. Graphics. No, no VSync. It just happens to be running at that. So currently it's at high. Let's drop it down to medium and see if that alleviates any of this. Tunes have not been saved. Oh, why save? So now we're running at medium settings. And let's see. So that netted us another 5 or 10 frames per second. But pretty, compared to Crash, dropping to medium, which net us a true 60 frames per second, this is not as ideal. So I'm curious, will going to low take us the rest of the way? Because some of these, I think it's just something is bottlenecking it, and it's not going to perform as good as we would like regardless. Sorry, I don't think that's saved because you have to click Y to lock in your settings, which I don't understand. So dropping all the way down to low settings now can sometimes get us 60 frames per second, but it's still getting dips 55, 50. So in order to play Spyro, it's like we might be approaching even more the Switch settings, which isn't what I thought you would have to do for this game. Compared to Crash, which I'd say looks and runs a fair bit better, this is getting less consistent performance, more hitches, and it's I had to take the settings all the way down to low. We could try raising the settings again and see if maybe some of it was perhaps the shader stuttering, but no, once we go all the way back to high, we're getting 30 frames per second again. So anyways, thanks for watching. So overall, I think that was really insightful. Some engines, there's a pretty consistent profile from engines and how they perform on the Steam Deck. The From Software games ran consistently. Sekiro and Dark Souls 3 ran better than Elden Ring, but they all ran similarly. The RE Engine games ran very similarly. You got Devil May Cry and RE2 running at 60 frames per second pretty consistently, and you have Resident Evil 8, which runs between 50 and 60 at really pretty solid graphic settings. It is very impressive to see on the device. The biggest disappointments was Nier Replicant and Spyro, really. But overall, I would say that there was an incredibly positive running. And I think that this is an incredibly impressive device. RDNA 2 is amazing scaled. So this is 512 shaders running up to 1600 megahertz. And it's a really powerful architecture. In some ways, it's like, I would say that some games at that resolution, they perform better than a PS4 would at those settings. And some games run worse. But in hardware, if I was to speculate on what this hardware is capable of, I think that if games were programmed directly for it, they would run better than PlayStation 4 even on a TV. And that's if it was gaining back the 20 to 30% of the hardware that it loses just by how these games aren't directly targeting it. But anyways, those are my thoughts on the hardware. If you like this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.